Before we start, let me just briefly introduce myself and HerPower. So my name's Camille, and I'm the founder of HerPower. HerPower is a youth-led nonprofit that focuses on emotional literacy, mental well-being, and empowerment. Our mission is to help young people to build both inner strength and outer confidence because emotional awareness is really the foundation of all growth. And today, I'm really happy that we're running this workshop hand in hand with She Builds the Future, which is an amazing organization that empowers girls to explore leadership and STEM fields with confidence. Since this is a joint workshop, so I'd love to invite She Builds the Future to quickly introduce themselves.
Hi everyone, my name is Ishine and I'm one of the co-founders of She Builds the Future. So we are an organization that is dedicated to empowering young women in STEM by creating opportunities, resources, and supportive spaces to explore their interests and grow as future innovators. And today's event, it's a very special collaboration with HerPower, and it's also under our Department of Psychology. And thank you so much for coming. We're so excited to have you here, and we hope today's activity inspires you to think deeper and continue to build the future with us.
Okay. Thank you so much for that introduction. Yeah, I'm really excited for us to be working together as well. I think both of our teams, like what both of our teams really stands for, really connects well, both empowerment through both education and emotional growth. Okay, so let's dive into today's topic, which is emotional literacy. So when you hear that term, what comes to mind? You can just type in chat or, just write one or two word. I'm just curious if anyone knows what emotional literacy is. Okay, I see someone's typing. Okay, understanding and recognizing emotions. Okay, that's pretty close. And I think this is a word that most people haven't heard of it before, even adults. And emotional literacy sounds a bit academic, right? But by it's going to make total sense. And you'll see why it actually matters in daily life. So before we really get into it, I just want to let you know that through this session, I'll be asking a few questions and you can answer by unmuting yourself or, type your thoughts in chat. And if you rather just listen, then that's perfectly fine too. All right, so let's start with a few everyday examples to warm up. Okay, so let's imagine this, right? You made plans with your best friends to hang out after school and you're at a cafe waiting. 10 minutes goes by, 20 minutes, and almost 30 minutes. There's no text, no calls, no nothing. And then you also try to call them, but there's no answer. So you decide to go home after. So then what would you do or say to your friend? Take a few minutes to think. I'll give you 30 minutes to, or sorry, I'll give you 30 seconds to think, and then you can just share your answer in the chat when you're ready. Are there any answers? Okay. Oh, yeah, I see one. Okay. So, that's totally fine because sometimes it takes a moment to think about what we'd actually say in real life. So let me just share a possible response. So you could say something like, "Hey, I was really looking forward to hang out today, but you didn't show up or text, and I feel kind of disappointed or ignored. So I just want to know if something happened." So notice how that message is clear and honest, but it's still kind. It's not blaming the person, but it still communicates how you feel. And, maybe your friend would reply, "Oh, I'm so sorry," right? "My test ran late and the teacher didn't let us use our phones. And by the time I got out, it was already late and I figured you already probably left. I'll make it up to you." Now, this is a healthy exchange, right? There's no drama, no one's breaking down, and it's just understanding. It's also important to not get mad and say things that you might regret in the futures because sometimes when we feel hurt, it's easy to react with anger. But you can see that in this situation, right? Angela didn't mean to leave you hanging. If we just jumped to the conclusion or said something harsh right away, then it could have damaged the friendship for no reason. And that's why taking a moment to pause and respect and express our feelings calmly is such a powerful skill. It turns our misunderstanding into understanding. So let's look at another scenario. So I'm not sure how many of you guys have siblings at home, but let's say you have siblings at home, right? And then lately it feels like your parents' attention isn't evenly divided. They spend most of their time helping your younger sibling, and you often hear, "Oh, like you're older, so you can handle things by yourself." Then what would you do or say to your parents? Again, you can just type it in the chat if you're ready, and if there's no response, then it's okay. Okay. So a possible response is saying like this. Okay, so someone say expressing my needs. That's very true. So you could say something like, "Mom and Dad, you've been really busy with my little brother lately, and I get that he needs a lot of help. But honestly, I feel kind of left out, and I really miss spending time with you. Could we maybe have some time together this weekend?" You know, when you express both your understanding and your own needs, like someone said, your parents are so much more likely to listen, right? And maybe they say something like, "Oh, I didn't realize that you felt that way, and you're right. We've been so busy. How about we, go for breakfast this weekend, just the two of us?" That's emotional literacy in action, right? It's honest, respectful communication that builds connection instead of conflict. And from my personal experience, a lot of the times parents are too busy to realize your needs. So what you got to do is learn to express your needs. So now that we've seen both examples, you can see how recognizing and naming emotion changes how we respond and how others respond to us. So let's take this idea a little deeper and see what emotional literacy actually means. So, emotional literacy is the ability to recognize, understand, and express emotions accurately, right? Think of it like learning a new language. When you learn a new language, you have to learn the vocabulary as well, right? And it applies to emotional literacy as well. When you have the vocabulary to your own emotions, right? The more words you know for emotions, the better you can express really what's going on inside your brain. So, for example, if you know the word angry, then you might just use it for everything. Just like when a baby is born, right? They cry to everything because they don't have the words for them to speak. And that applies the same to us, right? There's a difference between when you're frustrated, you're hurt, you're tired, or disappointed. But a lot of people just put them as anger or sadness. So when you can actually tell the difference and can express yourselves more clearly, it will make the communication with others so much healthier and easier. And here's something really interesting. So, emotional literacy is actually tied to psychology, right? It's about how our brain process feelings and how it affects the way we think, we act, and connect with others. It's not just a soft skill, it's a scientific way to help us grow emotionally stronger. So, now let's talk about why learning this matters so much. So, if you can say, I'm upset because I felt left out, it lands very differently than just saying, oh, whatever, like, I don't care, bye. That difference, right? The moment of clarity is what emotional maturity looks like. When you understand your emotions, you're not being too sensitive, you're being self-aware. And that helps you in so many ways, right? You can communicate without hurting others. You can set healthy boundaries. You can finally feel safe, seen, heard, and understood. Because the truth is, we all want to be understood, right? That's the human nature. But for others to be able to understand us, we first have to understand ourselves. That's what emotional literacy gives us, right? The ability to be able to translate what's happening inside into words that make sense to the outside world. So, before we move on, do you guys have a moment where you realize that expressing your emotions clearly actually helped fixing a problem? You can just say yes or no in the chat. I'm just curious. Okay, yes. I see one. Yes, yes. Okay. Okay, so let's see how we can actually practice the skill in our daily lives. So, how can we become emotionally literate? Well, there's a simple step-by-step process that you can start using right away. So, first, you identify, right? You pause and you try to notice what you're feeling, both physically and emotionally. You can ask yourself, okay, how do I feel right now? Maybe your heart's racing, your shoulders are tense. That could mean you're anxious or nervous. And after you recognize, you identify and put your feelings into words. When you can label an emotion, your brain naturally starts to calm down. Now, that's not a myth. It has been scientifically proven. That's why when we say if you can name it, then you can navigate it. It's true. So, second is reason, right? You figure out why you feel that way. Every emotion has a reason behind it, usually due to a need that's not being met. Maybe you feel jealous because you wanted recognition. So, understanding the cause helps you respond with empathy and not just reaction. And third, we have solution or expression. Sharing your feeling in a healthy and respectful way. For example, going back to the child and parent scenario, right? You say, oh, I feel left out today at the dinner table. Can we talk about it? That kind of honesty doesn't push people away. It actually builds stronger relationships. And I understand that you don't always want to express how you feel in front of your peers, right? Because you don't want to be the one that's vulnerable. But, and also, you don't want to sound needy, right? But let me tell you, if it's someone that you really love and know that they love you back, for example, like your parents, then it's totally fine to show your vulnerability because you know that they're gonna be able to reply you in respect, right? But if you don't feel comfortable doing that in front of your friends, you can share that feeling with yourself and express it in another way to your friend or peers. So these three steps seem simple, right? But they actually take practice because even adults, like a lot of people, they can't do this. And that's totally okay because Practice makes perfect. So now let's move on to the first step more deeply. So, as we mentioned, right, the first step is the first step to being emotionally literate is to recognize your emotions, or what we called emotional awareness. But here's the thing. We can't change what we notice because you are not conscious about it. So if you're not conscious, you don't notice. And if you don't notice, you're not conscious, right? If we ignore our emotions, they don't just go away. They can show in other forms like stress, unable to sleep, or even worse, it can lead to physical health problems. So that's why it's so important to learn how to pause and ask, what am I really feeling right now? So, to recognize our emotions, let's learn one of the best tools for doing that, which is called the Plutchik's wheel of emotion. This is one of my favorite part of today's session because it helps us make sense of feelings that we usually can't describe easily. Sometimes just say, oh, like, I'm fine, I'm mad, but there's actually a lot more going on beneath those simple words. And here's a question for you guys again. You don't have to answer, just think about it. So, have you ever had a moment when you were feeling really sad about something and then tears or anger just comes out first before you realize it? Like you didn't even know like what the solution could be or can be, and you're just completely overshadowed by your emotions. You don't have to answer this question, just think about it. Okay, so I think we've all been there, right? It can be confusing when emotions overlap or feel mixed together, and that's exactly why this wheel exists, right? It's the map that helps us find the exact emotion we're feeling. So before I introduce wheels, I just want to talk about who Robert Plutchik was. So he is a psychologist who studied both human and animal behavior. He was really interested in how emotions help living things survive. For example, animal would eat something yucky and they would spit it out and they would have this like look on their face, right? That's what we call disgust. Or sometimes animal would see an obstacle or another animal in their way and they would get big and they would get loud and even start growling. And that's what we called anger. Eventually, he discovered that there are 8 basic emotions that exist across every species, including humans. And those are the 8 emotions, right? They're anger, anticipation, joy, trust, fear, surprise, sadness, and even disgust. I'm not sure if you guys seen this movie before, right? Inside Out. It talks about emotions. So you can think of these 8 basic emotions like primary colors of emotions, just like how red, blue, and yellow mix to make all the other colors. These basic emotions can mix to create more complex feelings as well. And it's actually really cool how emotions actually work like chemistry. So the picture on your top right, that's a Puchik wheel. We're gonna zoom in on it later. But first of all, I just want to say that I really like this model because it's not only beautiful, it's also incredibly logical. If you look closely, the model is actually shaped like an ice cream cone, and that shape helps us visualize how emotion work inside us. So at the top of the cone, you can see that there are basically 8 core emotions, right? We have anger, anticipation, joy, trust, fear, surprise, sadness, and disgust. And these are our automatic reactions, the big and obvious emotions that shows up first when something happens. They're strong, distinct, and easy to recognize. But as we move down the cone, you can see that the intensity of the emotion starting to blend and it starts to become a bit less saturated. That means our emotions begin mixing with other feelings, right? We start reflecting on why we feel a certain way or what it means. At this point, our emotions become more complex and layered, forming a subtler color, right? That it's like, for example, like disappointment, compassion, or nostalgia. And as we go even further down the tip of the cone, the color becomes much, much more lighter and blurrier. And that's because at the very core of our emotional world, feelings aren't black and white anymore, right? They mix together, they overlap and influence each other. It's where sadness can exist right beside gratitude, or fear can coexist with excitement. And here's the really important insight. When our emotions are very intense, like anger, fear, or joy, we're usually stuck at the top of the cone. That's when one loud emotion takes over all the others. We stop noticing the complexity underneath. We almost never just feel one thing at a time. So our body are like chemical symphonies that are happening in different parts of the body and brain all at once. So if we only pay attention to the loudest one, then we would miss the quieter emotions that give us valuable information about what we truly need. And that's why emotional literacy means to calm down the cone. It means to slow down enough to recognize the multiple emotions that are happening together, like anger and sadness, fear and hope, stress and excitement. When we can hold space for more than one feelings at once, we can begin to respond with wisdom instead of impulse. So now, if we take that ice cream cone and we unfold it, it becomes a flower, right? Each petal shows the 8 basic emotions, and the ring moving outward represents intensity. The further out, the less intense the emotion is. And those basic emotions in the middle are our automatic sociological reactions, right? It's right here. The joy, trust, fear, and surprise. So this is the gut level stuff that shows up fast. But when each petal can dial up or dial down in strength, which is why the colors shift across the ring. So the Plachik's whale also places opposite emotions from each other. So let's take trust and disgust, for example. So disgust is the spit it out and rejecting and pushing away reaction, right? But trust is the lean in and welcome it response. They are the complete opposite. And anger and fear, we can sometimes feel it's kind of confused because they can show up together but they're different at the root, right? Anger drives us to push through an obstacle, whereas fear warns us the risk, right? And we back away. Different signals, different body postures, so they sit on the opposite side of the wheel. So seeing emotions this way, right, leads to an important shift. Our feelings don't exist in isolation. They work in harmony with our basic human needs. When we understand which need is being signaled, right, like safety, connection, recognition, or fairness, we can respond with accuracy instead of judgment. So, as I was saying, how emotions can escalate or de-escalate, they can go stronger or they can come down depending on what's happening and how we respond. So let's take a look at an example using the purple section of the wheel. So imagine someone sitting in class or at work, right? At first, they're just bored, the lessons feel repetitive, the topic doesn't click, and nothing new is happening. If that situation continues for too long, then boredom can start to escalate into disgust. Not necessarily disgust towards the person teaching, but it towards the whole situation. And Once that happens, the person starts to mentally click out, right? They feel disengaged, maybe even irritated, and their motivation begins to drop. They might think, okay, then what's the point of this? And they start slowly rejecting the experience altogether. So now here's where the twist comes in. If an emotionally aware teacher, classmate, or friend might notice those signs, then they can gently help them to
Support from your
re-engage.
peers, right? Because you don't want to be the one that's
I think someone's not muted. Michelle? Okay. Um, right, they can gently help them to re-engage. Something as simple as asking a question, giving a new challenge, or showing interest in their thought can help them flip that emotional pattern. So when that happens, right, the person can start to shift from the opposite of the wheel, which is the green zone, where they move from disengagement to acceptance. And maybe they would start thinking, okay, this isn't my favorite topic, but I can still learn something from here. Or they begin to feel a sense of belonging and realizing, hey, I'm part of this group, I can contribute here. As this feeling deepens, acceptance can grow into trust, right? Trust in the environment, trust in the people around them, and trust in themselves. That's the emotional shift we want to encourage, right? From withdrawal to connection, from rejection to engagement. And this doesn't only apply to classrooms or workplaces, it's also relevant in friendships, family, and teams too. When we recognize how emotions rise and fall, we can respond to others and ourselves more thoughtfully. Because here's the truth, emotions drive people, but people drive everything else. When we understand the language of emotions, we understand the logic behind human behavior. And that's the foundation of emotional literacy. That's what allows us to build stronger, more trusting relationships wherever we go. So now that we've experienced how emotion move and shift, let's go deeper into the wheel and see what's happening between the pedals. Now, here's something really interesting about emotions, right? As I was saying, they don't just exist separately. They can actually combine and blend to form thousands of different feelings. On the Plutchik's wheel, you can see a few examples, but in reality, there are over 3,000 emotion words in English language. That's because emotions aren't fixed, right? They overlap, they mix, um, and shift just like colors on a painting palette. So let's take anger as an example, right? Anger itself can show up in many forms, like annoyed, frustrated, irritated, agitated, furious, enraged, fuming, or even vexed, right? There's so much word to describe anger, but each word describe a slightly different intensity or flavor of that same core emotion. But when you combine emotions, new feelings start to appear, right? For instance, anger usually tells us something's blocking my way, and disgust would tell us something feels wrong or unfair. Now, what happens if those two combine, right? Then we get contempt. That's the emotion you feel when you're angry about something that you see as wrong or beneath your values. That's what you want to push away or challenge it. So, right, these things are all like emotional chemistry, right? Each core feeling is an element, and when you mix them, you create entirely new emotional compounds. So every emotion on the wheel has its own meaning and message, right? Like joy point towards connection and pleasure, fear signals potential danger, anger signals boundaries or obstacles, sadness asks for comfort or reflection, and when these mix, right, you can create any emotion that you experience. Once you learn to identify what's being mixed and how you feel, right? Maybe like today I feel a bit sadness with a little frustration and a hint of guilt, then you suddenly understand yourself so much better. It's like having a painting palette in your inner world, right? So next time when you catch yourself saying, I don't even know what I'm feeling, remember emotions are like rarely pure. They're layered, they're complex, and often made of several feelings that are happening at once. And that's completely normal because that's what makes us human. So let's talk about how to actually use the feelings wheel in real life, because this is where it truly becomes practical. So the key step is simple, is to pause and notice. When you're in the middle of a emotional moment, maybe something upsetting just happened, your first instinct is usually to react. But instead, you should try to take a deep breath and ask yourself, what am I feeling right now? Right? Not what do others want me to feel? Just what am I feeling right now? Now, this step seems simple, but it actually takes practice, and a lot of the times we are just completely overwhelmed by our emotions. And this is exactly why we can use this wheel, right? We can look at it and start to unpack those emotions. You might realize, okay, well, there's maybe a bit of anger because something I wanted didn't turn out the way I hoped. And at the same time, there's also some sadness because I feel like I've lost something that mattered to me. When you put all those together, right, a mix of anger and sadness, what you're really feeling is disappointed. And that's the beauty of this process. When you can use the wheel, you begin to see that one emotion often hides behind two or three others beneath it. By naming them, you move from simply reacting to understanding. So the next time you say, oh, I'm disappointed, you'll know that it's not just a vague emotion. It's actually a combination of different feelings, each carrying a message about what matters to you. This practice helps you build awareness and control because once you can name what's happening, you can respond it thoughtfully instead of being swept away. So, as you can see here, right, we have this chart with many, many other words for emotions, but it doesn't even contain all. There's still hundreds, even thousands of them, and each one contains something unique. But at the end of the day, every emotion has a meaning, a purpose, and a physical expression in our body. Anger tells us that our boundary are crossed, right? Feeling signals that something might be unsafe. Joy reminds us that something's good for us, and we relax and we feel open and connected. So when we start tuning into this full range of emotions, and when we learn to associate them with their place on the wheel, we begin to make sense of our inner world. All those complex and layered feelings that used to feel confusing suddenly become clear. And here's a really helpful way to think about it. Emotions are not random, right? They are signals. They are messages from your mind and body saying, hey, this is important, pay attention. So when we feel something strongly, it's our system's way of waking us up. It's telling us that something in our environment, our relationships, or even our thoughts really matters to us. And when we listen to that signal instead of ignoring or judging it or, letting it overwhelm us, we can actually get a valuable information about what we care about, what we need, and where we want to go next. That's why it's not just about labeling feelings as good or bad, right? Because every emotion, even the uncomfortable ones, serves us a function. They help us wake up, engage with the world, and grow. When you start to see emotions this way, your entire perspective changes, right? You stop seeing sadness as weakness or anger and failure. Instead, you start to recognize them as part of being alive, as a guide to help you become more self aware and more connected to who you really are. And that's what emotional literacy is all about. It's about learning to use your emotion as a guide to live, lead, and engage in the world fully. Because when you understand your emotions, right, you understand yourself. And when you understand yourself, you become more of who you truly meant to be. So let me just tune in into a bit of neuroscience because this part is quite interesting. So when we experience an emotion, it's not just passing a feeling, it's a biological event. Every emotion we have actually changes the brain chemistry. Neurons start firing differently, neurotransmitters like dopamine or cortisol are released, and even our nerve cells begin to shift their activity patterns. And a research by psychologist Barbara Fredrickson actually found that emotions don't just affect our mood, they can influence our DNAs. Our emotional states can change how certain genes are expressed, which then impacts our immune system, our energy levels, and how fast our body heals. That means emotional that means emotions are not just mental, they are also deeply physical. When we carry chronic negative emotions like ongoing stress, resentment, or anger, our body stays in a state of tension and alertness. So, over time, that constant pressure can disrupt the body's natural balance, leading to inflammation, fatigue, or even illness. That's one of the most important reasons why emotional literacy matters to us, because it helps us take care of our mental health and physical health. So when we learn to recognize emotions early and prevent them from escalating, we're not only protecting our relationships, right? We're also protecting our bodies. So next time when you feel stress or frustration building up, try to see it not as something to suppress, but as a signal that your brain and your body is saying, hey, this needs attention. So respond to it gently, rather than just letting it grow unchecked. That small awareness can make a huge difference, both emotionally and mentally. So before we move on, I just want to bring everything we've discussed so far together. The most important takeaway from the last few slides is this. Learn to recognize your emotions, right? Not just the obvious ones, but also the quieter ones underneath. Emotions really show up alone. They overlap, they mix, and sometimes they carry a message that we overlook. Every feeling in your body is a way of saying, hey, something matters here. So when you pause and name what you're feeling, even just saying, like, oh, I feel nervous or I feel disappointed, your brain starts to calm down. That's the power of emotional awareness, right? When you start tuning in all your emotions, you become more mindful of what truly matters, the people's values and experiences that give you your energy. And that's when your emotions stop controlling you and instead they start guiding you. That's what real emotional growth looks like, right? It's aligning with your feelings, your goals, and actions so they can move in the same direction. So now that we understand how emotional work, both in the body and the mind, let's look at how to turn that awareness into lasting happiness and resilience. Okay, so let's continue. So since we already learned how to identify using the Plutchik's wheel, we basically learned one of the most powerful parts of emotional literacy, which is awareness. But awareness alone isn't the end of the goal, right? The next step is learning how to build emotional well-being from those emotions, not just reacting them in the moment, because understanding your emotion is only half the story. And the real growth comes from learning how to use that understanding to create a happier and more balanced and more meaningful life. So, What exactly is positive psychology? It's a branch of psychology that focuses on cultivating happiness, satisfaction, and meaning in life, not just fixing what's wrong, but strengthening what's already right. It helps people build lives filled with joy, resilience, and a sense of purpose. Most people think that psychology is only about treating mental illness or managing problems like stress, depression, or anxiety. And of course, yeah, that's a very important part of it. But in positive psychology, which is founded by Dr. Martin Seligman, he asks a very different question. Instead of asking what's wrong with people, right? He asks what helps people thrive. In other words, what makes life truly worth living, right? What helps us flourish even when things get difficult. Positive psychology explores how we can cultivate inner strength like gratitude, optimism, kindness, and perseverance, and how these positive habits shape our overall well being. And obviously, it's not about pretending that everything's perfect, right? It's about learning how to notice the good, nurture it, and use it to grow through challenges. So Dr. Seligman, right, the founder of positive psychology, he was he once said something really captures the heart of the idea of positive psychology. So he wrote, oh, sorry. Okay. So he wrote, the good life consists in deriving happiness by using your signature strength every day in the main realm of living. The meaningful life adds one more component, using the same strength to move forward. Sorry, using the same strength to forward knowledge, power, or goodness. What this means is that a good life starts with knowing your own unique strength, right? The things that make you feel alive, capable, and authentic, and use those strengths every day. When you bring those strengths into your studies, your hobbies, or your relationships, you naturally begin to feel more joy and confidence because you're living in alignment with who you really are, right? You're not trying to become someone else, you're expressing the best version of yourself. But Dr. Seligman said that there's something even greater than the good life, and that's the meaningful life. A meaningful life happens when you take those same strengths and you use them for something bigger than yourself, right? It's using what you're good at, for example, like your empathy, creativity, leadership, or curiosity to help others, right? To create something good or make a positive difference in your community. That's the most important thing about positive psychology. And that's the moment when happiness deepens and lasts longer because it's no longer about feeling good about yourself. It's also about doing good in the world. Okay, so I have a little question for you guys to reflect on. You don't have to type in chat. So, if you could make a recipe for a meaningful life, what would you put in there? Would you add accomplishments, family, friendship, passion, maybe even food or creativity? I would definitely add food. So now that we've talked about what makes a good life and a meaningful life, I want to introduce another powerful framework that helps us build both. So it's another psychological model that gives us a way to strengthen our balance, purpose, and joy in everyday life. And it's called the PERMA model of well-being. So, what exactly is the PERMA model of well-being? Well, just like me, you probably want to be happy, right? When you're happy, everything in life feels lighter and more meaningful. You enjoy life more, you're more productive, and you're better able to handle the challenges or setbacks when they come. Happiness also strengthens your relationships and help you find more meaning in the things that you do every day. And I'm sure that we all feel that way. But the big question is, how do we actually get there? How do we feel happy? That's where the PERMA model comes in, right? It's a another framework also by Dr. Seligman, and he introduced in his book Flourish. which is published in like 2012, and it's become the most widely used model for understanding what makes a person truly thrive. So the PERMA model shows the five core elements that we all need in order to flourish and build a positive sense of well-being. But here's something really important to remember, right? No two people are exactly the same. Each of us experience happiness and fulfillment in our own way. That means the five building blocks in this model might contribute to your well-being a little differently than they do for someone else. For example, one person might feel their strongest happiness through relationships and connection, while other might feel through creativity or accomplishment. There's no single right path. The goal is to discover what combination helps you thrive. It's also important to know that well-being isn't the same thing as happiness, right? Because happiness is a temporary emotion, like joy, excitement, or laughter. It comes and goes. Nobody feels happy every second of the day. That's completely normal. But well-being, on the other hand, is deeper and steadier. It means having the tools, the mindset, and the habit that help you stay grounded, hopeful, and balanced, even when life gets tough. So rather than chasing like constant happiness, the PERMA model helps us build a stronger foundation to allow us to feel content, purposeful, and resilient, no matter what life throws at us. So let's take a closer look at each of the five building blocks in the model and explore how they work together to create true well-being. So let's start with P in the PERMA, right? It stands for positive emotion. So positive emotion are the uplifting feelings that make life brighter. Things like joy, gratitude, love, amusement, even peaceful contentment. They're all part of positive emotions. And scientific research shows that experiencing positive emotions can actually improve your physical health, and they can strengthen your relationships and even boost your performance in school or work. But these emotions don't just come from big achievements or life-changing moments. They often come from small or ordinary things that lift us, right? For example, like laughing with a friend, finishing something you're proud of, or even cared by someone you love. And it's as well, it's about when you think about your past, right? Can you find gratitude instead of regret? When you think about future, can you imagine hope instead of fear? That shift in perspective is what creates long-term emotional well-being. So the next part of the PERMA model is engagement. Engagement is an feeling of being completely absorbed by what you are doing that you lose track of time. It's when you're not thinking about your phone, your to-do list, or what's next. You're just in the moment. So psychologists call this flow. I'm not sure if you guys heard of it, but I think most of us heard about like the flow, right? So the flow is when your focus is so deep that everything else seems to fade away. You stop worrying about what others think and you're just enjoying the process itself. So engagement is powerful because and it connects you to your authentic self. When you use what you're naturally good at in a new and creative way, research shows that you actually become more healthier, more focused, and resilient over time. So next time when you notice something that you're very immersed in, that you forget to check the clock, that's flow. And the third building block of well-being is relationships. And this one might be just the most important of them all. Having a positive, supportive relationship is absolutely essential for emotional health. Our positive emotion actually become stronger when they are shared. So think about it, like laughing with your best friend feels a lot better than just laughing, you're like laughing alone, right? So every like small act of connection matters. It's it's like it's about thinking about how we nurture those feelings in daily life, right? By doing small things that show care, like sending a kind message, listening without judgment, and remembering how someone's doing, or genuinely celebrating another person's success. And the fourth building block is meaning, right? Meaning comes from having a sense of purpose that's bigger than yourself. Sometimes that gives your life direction, depth, and significance. Now, things like wealth, grades, or career might give us goals, but they don't necessarily give us meaning. But finding a sense of meaning in your career or academics is extremely important. Meaning is about connection, contribution, and purpose. And the search for meaning is deeply a human need, especially among the philosophy world, right? Philosophers are constantly trying to find the meaning of everything in this universe. So meaning is what give us strength when things get hard, right? That inner voice that says, this is tough, but I know why I'm doing it. When we have a purpose, our struggles feel less random and more like part of a bigger story. And finally, the last building block of the PERMA model is accomplishment. Accomplishment is about setting goals, right? Both big and small, and feeling that sense of pride and satisfaction when you achieve them. These goals can be anything that gives you a purpose or a goal. Maybe it's like reading a book once a week, finishing a tough assignment, learning an instrument, starting a new hobby, or even building a community project. What matters to us the most isn't the size of the goal, right? It's the effort, it's the focus and the intention that you put in it. Because every time you commit to something and follow through, you strengthen your confidence and your belief in your abilities. And psychologists often describe this accomplishment using words like achievement, mastery, or competence. It's the feeling of like, oh, like I did it. Not because it was easy, but because you pushed through. You learned something and you grew from the process. But here's a really important point that Dr. Seligman also emphasizes that true accomplishment, right, the kinds that leads to long-term well-being, doesn't come from chasing external rewards like money, fame, or approval. It comes from pursuing intrinsic goals, things you do because they genuinely matter to you, because you enjoy the process, or because it aligns with your personal value. When your goal reflects who you are, every step you take becomes meaningful, even the smallest ones. So every time you follow through on a goal, no matter how minor it seems, you're building resilience and self-trust. You're proving to yourself, I can show up, I can grow, and I can keep moving forward. So that's all the five building block. And since we're a bit short of time since like we had some technical difficulties, so let me just quickly go through this last one point and then we're going to end today's session. So I just want to mention the plus of in the PERMA model, right? These are the lifestyle factors that support your emotional well-being on a daily basis, like optimism, physical activity, nutrition, and sleep. They remind us that happiness isn't just about the mindset, it's also about how we treat our bodies and take care of ourselves, right? And optimism is one of the most powerful positive emotions that we can build. It doesn't mean that everything's perfect, but it means that trusting even when things go wrong and that like the belief that they can still turn out okay. For me personally, I've really come to believe that whatever happens is meant to happen and that things will eventually unfold in a way that leads to a better outcome, even if it doesn't feel that way in the moment. And usually we can only see that better outcome afterward when we look back and we realize how much we've grown from it. And then second is physical activity, right? Because moving our bodies and our brain, it releases endorphins, and it's a natural chemical that reduces stress and lift our mood. And then the third, we have nutrition, right? Food, it doesn't just fuel our body, it also fuels our minds. And like healthier food, more nutrient-rich food, like vegetable, fruits, nuts, or fish, they actually report higher healthy, like how higher happiness and focus. And diets that are high in processed food or sugar can actually increase symptoms like fatigue, anxiety, or even depression. And then the lastly, but actually the most important one is sleep. Okay, sleep is one of the most important parts of well-being. If we don't sleep enough, our brain go into survival mode and we become more reactive, more anxious, and less able to focus or regulate our emotions. And this is why a good sleeping habit is so important because it prevents depression, it improves memory, and can strengthen emotional control. Okay, so let me just. Okay, so as we bring today's workshop to an end, let's take a moment to step back and look at the bigger picture. So, everything we've covered today, right? From understanding what emotional literacy means to using the Plutchik's wheel to identify our emotions and exploring what the Perma Plus model, like build balance and joy, they're actually all connected to one central idea, right? Awareness leads to growth. Emotional literacy helps us recognize and name what we're feeling to give language to the things that happen inside of us. And Plutchik's wheel gives us a visual map, right? It helps us understand that emotion aren't just happy, sad, right, angry, but it's complex, it's layered, and it's meaningful. It reminds us that when we can name exactly how we feel, we begin to understand it. And understanding is what gives power. And the PERMA model, right, it teaches us how to take that awareness into action, how to build joy, connection, meaning, and well-being in our daily lives. When we put all these ideas together, we're not just, learning to manage emotions, we're learning to use them because every feeling, even the uncomfortable or difficult ones, can point us towards something important, towards something that truly matters to most of us. So, next time when you feel something strong, try this simple process, okay? Pause it, name it, understand it, and ask yourself, what can this emotion teach me? That's the question that turns every feeling into an opportunity for growth. And that's where real emotional strength begins, not by avoiding emotions, but by learning from them. All right, so thank you so much for coming to today's session. We really appreciate you taking the time to join us, and we hope that you were able to learn something new, meaningful, or even just a little eye-opening by yourself. We hope to see you again next week, same time, same place, where we will be exploring how to communicate our emotions to others, how to solve conflict, and this is like a very important step towards emotional growth as well, and you can sign up on the same Google Doc as you did for this workshop. Also, one more thing before you go. This is our social media information. Feel free to follow or reach out if you have any questions, feedback, or if you like to say updated on future events. Me and the She Builds the Future team will be staying here for a few minutes in case anyone wants to stay back to chat, ask questions, or share a few reflections from today. Once again, thank you all so much for being here and for showing up. We hope that you have a wonderful evening. So take care and see you next week.